Hi, I am Dr. Kim Sage. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. Welcome to my channel. I wanted to make this video because something happened to me this morning that happens to me so many times, and it's been happening for the past couple of years during the school year. Every morning, or almost every morning, when I drive my daughter, and last year my daughter and son, to school, I see this man walking his daughter, who I think last year was in probably kindergarten. She's really little. And so I'm thinking they're going to the bus, right? And she's just this cute little thing. And almost always, this man is about 50 feet ahead of her. He's walking, he's got the lunchbox, she's kind of dilly-dallying, looking at the flowers, and you know, the bus isn't there yet. They're not running late or anything. And it triggers me so much every single time. And why it triggers me, I'm going to go into in today's video, which is how we can be unaware of childhood triggers. But what makes me mad is that the corner, so he'll be up here, she'll be back here. And the corner, even though I live in a relatively small beach town, it's really a busy corner. There's a grocery store right nearby. Everyone, including a ton of teenagers, at least 1,000 or more, are on their way to school. People are running late. It's a prime corner to getting to the school, right? And if you drop off teenagers, I mean, anywhere, you know, it's crazy. But especially when teens are running late, trying to park their cars. And it triggers me because I think she's so little. Why are you always so far ahead of her? Why are you not holding her hand? I'm not saying I've never seen him do that, but 9 times out of 10, he is way ahead of her. He's not even looking at her. Anybody could grab her. She could run out in the street. A dog could bite her. And it triggers so many levels of annoyance and rage in me. And not to the point where I'm like dysfunctional, right? But I just notice it, and it pisses me off, and I notice it. And maybe he's a great dad. Maybe he has a lot on his mind, right? And I've never seen her, to be fair, dart into the street, but she is still, I'm telling you, like 5, 6-ish years old. She cannot be more than that. And I realized today that, you know, as I was making this video, I decided to actually make this video over another video that I keep working on, which is about narcissistic fathers, or just really toxic fathers and the impact. But I wanted to talk about how these little things happen to us throughout our day, how we have these feelings, these experiences, and we don't necessarily know what's happening. For most of you who are probably not trying to analyze every trigger or aren't in the world of therapy, maybe, you know, sometimes you think about it, but I want to just give you some things to think about the next time these things happen to you, and then we'll talk about some things that you can do when they happen. So let's get into it. The first trigger is really about what I just described, and I realized that it was a parenting trigger, but more than that, it's about neglect. It is about feeling or watching someone else be neglected that triggers your own wounds inside. Of course, as a mom, I mean, I could lay out, you know, if I'd had a great childhood, why this might trigger me. But I think it's like, A, he's a parent and he's a dad. He's neglecting paying attention to her physical safety, her emotional safety, some really special time they could spend together. And so the idea of neglect, of just not even literally being seen, that feeling that we can have inside when we are feeling neglected, at work, as parents, in our partnerships, in relationships, any place we feel neglected, just like not even seen in our invisible pain or even worried or cared about, can be a trigger. Number 2, witnessing or being around other people displaying excessively strong emotions. And it might be that someone also could be mad at you. But the idea of someone being mad at you in anger and or alongside strong emotion can trigger a fear in us. Now, just the strong emotion, especially if you had a more complex childhood where parents raged and were angry and out of control, or any kind of emotions were not allowed, that can just bring up so much fear and trigger in you. And the idea that if someone has a mood or mind shift in some way, that they are somehow in those emotions, even if they're subtle, they're somehow mad at you. And how we kind of can take that, as I've talked about in a lot of videos, and then interpret that and overanalyze that and make that mean something. And it almost always comes back to being something about us. The next one is being misperceived and misjudged. To find out that other people have said or done something about you, and this is really true, obviously, on social media, on the internet. You know, I'll see comments and I'll be like, gosh, like, that doesn't feel very good. Where'd you get that from? Or, you know, and I have to remind myself, like, whatever. That doesn't bother me too much in the beginning when I started making videos, because frankly, I avoided really any online content, even my own Facebook, for the most part, for years. I think a lot of it came with my age and finally not caring anymore. But in the very beginning, I would tell my kids, you know, someone said blah, blah, blah on TikTok, and they'd be like, Mom, welcome to the internet, you know? But where it hurts more is like in social groups, in schools, and jobs, and friendships, and relationships, to have someone misjudge your intentions or misperceive who you are. What that triggers in me is this feeling in childhood of, don't you know who I am? That so many of us can feel when we feel like our parents didn't see us for who we truly were. Number 4 is really about feeling like no one cares about us. It might transfer into feeling unappreciated, but the idea that we are alone, and it might be loneliness or feeling just alone in the world, but that at the end of the day, no one really cares for us. And, you know, I think this is true in a lot of situations, even where the perception is that, oh, there's a community, a church community, a school community, a neighborhood community, that even if there are people there, they're not always available to be there for you. But the truth is that so many of us experience childhood alone, and for a number of reasons, we might also isolate ourselves in our pain, as I've talked about, in like avoidant attachment, or even in more introverted states. We just don't feel comfortable expressing emotion, or we have to regulate alone, like an avoidant attachment, to kind of get back on track, or too much closeness prompts us to want to be alone. But the idea of feeling alone, or like no one cares about you, what you like, what you want, hi Coco, you know, all of that can be really, really triggering. Number 5 is, number 5 is making mistakes. It could be an editing error at work. It could be, you know, forgetting an important detail. It could be a grade or a review of you. It could be even your kids, your partner saying, you know, why did you do that? You know, you messed up. And we should all be able to say and give feedback, but when you have a very wounded childhood, the idea that you did something wrong, that you made a mistake, which literally can just be, you know, feedback, but oftentimes it can be also really, you know, non-constructive feedback. But the idea is that doing something wrong is about you being wrong and being bad and often being unlovable. So the idea of you not being perfect, which is often tied to childhood trauma, right? With that inner and outer critic, we're trying to get in front of that and overmanage that to not feel the pain of not being enough or being a mistake, feeling like we were a mistake in our own home in some way. That can be incredibly triggering. Number 6 is, this is a very specific one to your story, but one of the biggest triggers I have found is like when you are often in childhood, you are often futurizing, you know, when I grow up, I'm going to have this life and this partner, I'm going to be this thing or whatever. And then you get that thing or you lose it, or you're always trying to get it. For example, security. Now, and stability. And that can often be wrapped in marriage, relationships, finances, your own job security. But the idea that somehow you lost, like you're never going to have, or you lost the thing that you most thought was going to give you strength and stability in life, everything that reminds you of that can be a trigger. And so it can be things like not getting, this is common in divorce, right? You often lose. The women typically don't do as well in divorce, although I know it's not always true, but historically speaking, but every person that gets divorced, you know, you lose half of what you had from a financial standpoint. And so just the loss of that might be that I've talked about growing up, you know, I think I have here, I didn't live in a house until I was in 5th grade. We lived in apartments. And then over the course of years and my parents' trauma, like we lost that house when I was much older, I was an adult, but the idea was that the house was going to be a final security. And so in my fantasy childhood, I was going to have the perfect parenting life, right? I was going to be a full-time stay-at-home mommy. I was going to, drive the van, and do all the things and volunteer. And I did do those things for a long time. They weren't always as rewarding in some ways as I thought they were going to be in some parts, but I really wanted that. And becoming a single mother with 4 children really took that away much earlier than I could have ever imagined. I had never really dreamed that was going to happen. And then it did. And so me kind of trying to get over the shattering nature of not having that life has been one thing, right? So that's what I'm talking about for you. The trigger of watching other people have that, living in a very, financially blessed community and not necessarily having those same things, watching people have that, seeing other, moms who don't necessarily, I don't want to say have to work, but they get a choice. When you're a single parent, you often don't have choice, right? And so all I'm saying is that anything that represents that loss, it could be money, it could be watching someone else have it, it could be just exhaustion and wanting to be a different version of yourself, that, as it ties to your childhood, can be really triggering. And the last one is any experience of conflict or need to self-advocate, anything that feels like you have to put yourself in danger, even though it may not actually be danger. It may just be, speaking up to your boss. Anything that feels like conflict can be triggering. And so that can bring up a lot of feelings inside to where you don't feel like you are worthy of it or entitled to it, or it's, you're playing it out in your overanalyzing head. It's going to go badly. And so that can be a trigger you're not even aware of. So all of those things can happen to us on a daily basis, right? I've talked about, I think I made a video, I'm not sure if I ended up posting that one, of watching a show on HGTV with this like family where everybody, they all live nearby and they all have these great houses and they were all there for each other. And I'm sure it's not perfect, but when I'm watching that, I can project like, oh, they have this great life. And how come I don't have that? I've never had that being an only child. And so, it can be stupid things like watching movies, watching shows, seeing a family in the grocery store, watching a dad, leave his daughter trailing behind, needing to talk to a patient or a boss. It can be being misjudged online or in a conversation or by my kids. And so that's why I wanted to share that so many of these things that seem like little things can really disrupt your day. They can really mess you up and make you somehow, go into a bad mood, or maybe you were kind of feeling fine that morning and now you just feel kind of down and yucky and gross and you don't really know why. And so these things are really deeply embedded in our childhood and why we feel that way. So I wanted to share, just like this is one of the things I've shared in other videos, it's the little graphic I made on managing emotional flashbacks. And I really would say that trying to use this template for these triggers, I think is a great way to do it. And I'll go through a few more also. But basically is identifying, I'm having a flashback, I'm having a feeling, I'm having an emotional response to something, right? Seeing the dad with the daughter makes me kind of angry and annoyed. And so I want to pause, take some breaths, and then identify the trigger and name the emotion. Oh, it really triggers me to see a parent neglecting their child, not protecting them, and it makes me kind of mad, makes me kind of angry. Speak lovingly to your inner child and assure the inner child. Okay, I can go into reminding myself that I'm not that child is not me, that I have not, while I have certainly made mistakes, have not parented my children in that intentional, neglectful way. Of course, they've had times where they didn't get their needs met, like that child behind the dad. Maybe he's a great dad. It's just that that's what it brings up. And so I want to honor that I'm not that my child is safe, that I try to do a better job with my own kids, that my inner child didn't deserve that. And then I want to be mindful and solve the problem. And that is, can I do anything about it? I'm not going to confront this guy. And if his kid was running in the street, I might. But being a psychologist, you have to be a little careful about those kind of things, right? And so in that case, there's not much to problem solve except to identify the emotion and name it, to tame it, right? To just say, yeah, that really annoys me. And this is really probably more about me than about them. But that's a wound for me, and I need to be mindful of that. And it's okay that I have that wound. And it's not my fault, but I can choose to let it like mess up my morning, or I can acknowledge it and kind of work on pausing and letting it go. As I've mentioned, you can also, like I said, recognize the emotion, added a few more. You can name the emotion. I feel angry because in my childhood I've had this happen. I like to take the strategy of putting my hand on, I have clients do this, put their hand on their heart and just kind of like lean into themselves and their own story and try to get like safe in their own body and just be like, okay, like obviously I was driving so I can't stop and do this, but when I got home, if it's still triggering me, it's okay. You're okay. And this is not really about them. It's about you. And let's take some breaths and slow down, and you can trust yourself that you can handle today or whatever's going on. You might want to connect to your inner compassion, as I said in the trigger graphic, to your inner child, and then kind of lean into those reparenting statements. As I always say, you are your inner child and you are also your inner parent. And so in that situation, I need to honor the trigger of the inner child, but also meet that inner child with some sort of adult loving self. And that's really true for all of those triggers. So that is my video today for what I think are often triggers we just have no idea that are hijacking our brains on a daily basis many times. And if you're not really aware of it and mindful, it really can ruin the rest of your day, or you might turn around and then dump that emotion on your employees or your employer or your kids or your partner or your animals and not even realize it. And so I think it's really important to know whenever you're feeling something. I used to run a group and I would say, be a detective. Like, oh, what is that about? What could that be about? You don't have to like massively overanalyze it, but just try to honor it, name it to tame it. That's the Dan Siegel stuff around honoring and naming emotions, which actually helps turn down the volume on those emotions. And often it helps us process what's going on and to then sort of get on with our day or our lives or whatever. So if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I would love for you to do that and join this little growing community. I'm also trying to post more here on YouTube Shorts and on TikTok with daily content about all of these topics. And please check out my link down below and or up in the corner of the banner up there, which will give you a lot more information about the courses I created on Thinkific. One is about having borderline and or traumatic kind of type parents who may have narcissism, emotional immaturity, some kind of just, significant pattern of wound. And then a course on reparenting your inner child and your inner parent. And then a free course on identifying what may have happened to you in childhood and really identifying, was this okay or not okay? Only you can truly decide what's okay and not okay. But I think it helps to know that certain things, regardless of parenting practices, can be extremely traumatic and wounding and hurtful. So thank you for being here. Please stay safe and well, and I'll see you next Saturday. Bye-bye.